Hey, I'm Eric Reed, head coach for men's soccer here at Malone University.
Okay, so we will begin by the first question. What was your dream job as a kid?
Oh, I love that question. I think I always had the dream of playing pro soccer. I actually wanted to play pro soccer and baseball, but baseball left my dreams pretty quick. Um, but I think about it a lot because my thought was I wanted to get paid as a pro to play. It was never to make millions or live in a mansion or something like that. And so I just remember growing up and seeing other pro athletes and thinking, wait, I can do that as my living, hands down, as long as I can remember. That's what I always wanted to do.
Okay, so will you put your kids into soccer?
Oh,
On
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I value a lot of the life lessons and relational lessons and things like that that I've learned throughout the years, and I see tons of value in it. So I'd like to think I'm not going to push my kids if they don't want to, on some level, but I also see the value that competition and teamwork and having goal setting and things like that can have, to shape your mind and your heart at a young age. So they'll definitely be involved in something, whether it's soccer. That's up to them, but
So how you discover this sport and why you choose to be a goalkeeper, which is a very specific position.
yeah, that's a great question too. You guys are good. Um, I think like anyone else, I just played soccer as a kid. My parents put me in it as an activity, but I just fell in love with it from an early age. And so I've always played as soon as I could walk, I was into any sport I could try. Um, and goalkeeper specifically was a funny one because in my more athletic years as a youth, I was a goalkeeper, but also played on the field. And so I remember my first real high level competitive team. The coach recruited me onto it as a goalkeeper, but he said I would also play half of the game on the field. He liked me in both positions, and then forgot to bring on another goalkeeper. And so I ended up being the only goalkeeper. And within a year or two, by the time I was about 11 or 12, I something about it just ate me up, and so I loved it, and I was addicted to it. And after that point, I never had the desire to play on the field again. I loved being a goalkeeper.
So did you have the desire to do a career in this sport or it was just a simple hobby, like when you was a kid?
No, I think early on I always wanted to make it a career. Um, like I said, I think my dream instantly, as soon as I found out what professional sports were, I was like, that's what I want to do. That was definitely a goal of mine. And that really, again, shaped me in a young age to then be driven and competitive, probably more than I needed to be. A lot of my old friends make fun of me for how competitive I could be at 10 years old. And it probably wasn't always the healthiest thing for me, but it's just, that's what sports really drove in me, from a very young age. So I always had that drive to get to a higher level.
Now we will talk about your college career. So how did it feel winning a national title for UCLA in 22?
Oh man, it's so hard to describe. I mean, there's so many emotions that go through it. For me, I think in the moment, it felt great, obviously, like anyone else. But for me, it was also a lot of personal growth because I wasn't the starting goalkeeper that year. And so I had to realize and balance out my value on the team and how much it really meant. And it's interesting because I think it's actually grown to mean more as I've matured, than it even maybe did in that moment. I think selfishly, I was young and I didn't maybe appreciate it as much as I could have in that moment. And I regret that now, but at the same time, it's helped shape me and mature me along the way. And so, um, one of the great things I always look back on is that it really started setting the standard, for what my career should be and what I wanted it to be right away. So my first college season ever was a national championship. And so it immediately set the bar very high for me to say that nothing less than that is acceptable from here out. And so every other season that we didn't win one was considered a disappointment and a motivation to get better the next year, which, in hindsight, again, is a tough mentality to keep long term, but really drove me to be my best.
After college, you were not drafted into the Major League Soccer. How did you take that news?
Ooh, that was a hard day. I still remember that day. Probably one of the lowest points emotionally for me, that I can remember in the game. I've lost finals and things like that, but that day for me was always harder. Um, I think for me, a lot of it became a check on my ego. I believed I was incredible, and again, I look back now and I realized there was more work I could have done to prevent that and to have been driven to the next level earlier. Um, at the same time, I also look back and I'm very thankful for what I had. And so, in that moment, it really, really broke my heart, and it was a difficult pill to swallow, so to speak. And so it was a tough day, but like any athlete, I kind of took it on the chin and used it as motivation. Um, and spent the next few years trying to find the coaches that turned me down and try to get my revenge somehow on the field. But that didn't always happen. But again, I tried to spin it and use it as motivation rather than discouragement.
However, you joined the United Soccer Leagues, California Victory. How was the transition from D1 college soccer to USL soccer?
Um, I was fortunate enough. UCLA was filled with so many players who would go professional. And so I joke that one of the most professional organizations I've ever been a part of was UCLA, which wasn't even professional. And so truthfully, the jump wasn't as big as I expected. Now MLS would have been another level, I think, that I was not necessarily prepared for. But USL, I felt very prepared for it because of the work I had put in college and the lessons I had learned. My years at UCLA, they weren't always easy, but there was a lot of maturing that happened in that time. And so to then turn professional, I felt very prepared. I felt like the coaching staff and the lifestyle there really drove me to be ready for that.
Within your 7 years in the USL, which team was most memorable to play for?
Oh, there's a lot of great memories. That's a hard one to choose. I think for me, especially as a Christian, sports have always meant more than just what happens on the field. And for this reason, I think in the USL professionally is the Charlotte Eagles, where I ended my career. They're a Christian team and a Christ-centered organization. And so they always have a really special place in my heart. At the same time, so many memories. I spent 3 years under Coach Martin Rennie between Cleveland and Carolina Railhawks, and they were just an absolutely incredible experience as well, and a lot of learning and great friendships and relationships came out of that as well. So it's very, very hard to choose. But if I have to choose one, I'd say that the Charlotte Eagles, because of how much I grew in my faith there and some of the real, really deep, lasting relationships and friendships that were built there.
So what time in your life did you decide you wanted to pursue the game of soccer as a coach at the higher level?
As a coach?
Yeah, as a coach.
That's a great question too. And I remember early on, I think kind of like in my youth, I discovered that you could be a professional and make your living playing the sport. Then when I got to a certain level, I realized if I coach, I never have to leave. And I just love soccer. It became such a passion for me. And so I knew early on, probably when I was about a senior in high school, is when I decided I want to coach when I'm done. And I was actually very fortunate. I still remember my freshman year in college, I shared that with my goalkeeper coach, and he embraced it. And so he brought me in and taught me how to coach. So I was 18 years old, but I was his assistant when he did other side jobs and camps and clinics. And I was coaching club and high school already at a young age. Sorry, someone in my window. And so I was very fortunate enough to have a mentor early on to help guide me and also just really keep my excitement for that going. And so I knew early on I wanted to coach. And then my last year playing, God just moved something in my heart to say, this is your last year to play. And so right away I knew that it was time to move on, to let the younger group take over for the old me. And lifestyle-wise too, that same year I felt my heart being pulled toward coaching. My wife got pregnant, and having a kid during the playing season was going to be difficult. And so I just felt like God really shaped my life to say that it was my last season to play and that he made the path to coaching very clear.
You had U18 American caps with the American national team. So how did that process happen, and how did it make you feel playing for the country that you grew up in?
Oh, that was really fantastic. I joke that the face of soccer back then just looked so different. The path to a national team was a lot more clear back then than it is now. Nowadays with youth club and with academies and ECNL, and there's a lot of different avenues to get seen. Back then it was much more clear. So you played club, and then there was ODP, and that was it. And so ODP created a very clear pipeline to the national team. And so from an early age, maybe 13, I made the regional team. And so I was already grouped in kind of a top group of goalkeepers for the country, and spent the next few years just being identified and such. And I still remember there was a tournament in Florida, and I just had a stellar tournament. I was on fire. I kind of felt like I was in the zone. And I still remember walking off one game and looking over and seeing the national team coaches there. And I was pretty pleased that they were at that particular game. And so that's really all that it started. That tournament ended. I came home. I got a phone call the next day, inviting me to a training camp. And then I spent the better part of a year and a half with multiple camps with the U18 national team. And that did feel really, really great to be at that caliber. It was just a great experience. That caliber of coaching, that caliber of teammate, the lessons I learned just by watching the guys around me, by learning from older goalkeepers. You know, the U18 team would train with the U20s, and seeing guys above me and how driven they were, how serious they took their craft. I was a young guy. I was 16 years old, learning from some of the best talent in the country, and was blessed with some great coaching as well. And so it was really a great experience. And to look back on that now, I'm very, very grateful for my time with the program.
So, with your experience in the USL and California Victory, you were named the team MVP. How did that make you feel, being it was your first couple seasons in the USL?
That was great. The California Victory was a very strange team. We did not win very much, which was crazy to me coming off of such a successful college career. I wasn't used to losing. And so one of my personal goals was just that I need to be the best that I can be. And so in doing so, to be able to be chosen in that way was really valuable to me to kind of help confirm some of that hard work and focus that I put in. I felt like I'd really kind of given my heart and soul to the team over that season. Like I said, to be kind of given that award at the end was a really nice little cherry on the top to say, hey, it's been a really hard season, but we recognize that you didn't just go through the motions. You didn't just take it easy and cruise through this. Like, you really put it in. And so it was a real honor. And as well, because I always try to really appreciate the fans who come out and cheer you on. And the California Victory didn't have a lot of fans, but the ones we had were fantastic. Even if it was 8 guys there, they were beating on drums and yelling and screaming. And so even though it wasn't thousands of fans, every game I loved the idea of just going out and serving that group. And so that kind of spoke to that as well. The fans were part of that voting as well, which was, to me, it gives us a real personal note. And it became more of a personal win for me, even though those results didn't happen on the field the way I wanted that season. That was a nice little victory.
So, going back to the question about the national title in 2002, you were a redshirt freshman.
Mm-hmm.
How did it feel going into your sophomore year and then your junior and senior year being captain of your team? How was that transition from being a redshirt freshman that didn't play to being the starting goalkeeper and being a captain of the team?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of that journey that, I could talk for hours about all the different ways I was shaped through that. Between that first year and my last year and that whole journey, I'd say the biggest thing that happened was I became a Christian. And I still look back and I really regret the way I acted my freshman and a little bit of my sophomore year. I was very, very selfish. I spent a lot of times not putting the team first, not serving my teammates, not loving my teammates, or the coaching staff. I took a lot for granted, and I spent a lot of time buried in my own ego. And for me, why that question is so maybe personally touching is because it reminds me of the growth I had in those years, and the maturity, and even just the change in my heart to become a Christian and to completely see the world differently. And now I look back and I think my regrets and where I feel bad was that I had the opportunity to play with, train with, and serve some incredible players, guys who played pro and had fantastic careers, guys who went on to represent our country at a full level, at the full national team. And the time I had to serve them, I did less than I could have. And so that part was tough, but it shaped me to help be a leader and a captain later on. I think by my junior, senior year, I had I'd earned that respect from my teammates. It wasn't a paper title of, hey, you're a senior, so here you go. And I really made it a point to just be there for my team, to serve them, to be an example. Not a perfect one, but to really seek to be a true leader and a captain. And that was, for me, just such a turning point in my life, to become a believer. And then also that led into me being a servant leader for my team. And at least that's what I tried to do. And to have that title and to have that respect of my teammates meant a lot. I think it was huge too, because my last year we only had 2 seniors and we were both the captains. A good friend of mine, Kyle McClung, and great guy, still talk to him to this day. And to be having that only 2 seniors on the team, but still lead that team into a Final Four was pretty great too. So the whole path that shaped me in college was tremendous. But that change was massive, to go from a redshirt, selfish, egotistical freshman who, my celebration for winning the national title was nowhere near what it should have been, because in my head I was still mad I wasn't playing, rather than really truly encapsulating myself in the team spirit. And so going from that little chunk of a dude I want to punch in the face now to being the guy I was for my team in the end, I can now look back and be proud of that journey. Not every step of it, but the end product I really feel grateful for.
So, talking about Christianity, we're going to go into faith-based questions. So, you took religious studies at UCLA. Was that your first initial major, or did you change it once you realized about your Christian faith?
That actually was an awesome step as part of my faith journey, actually. So I came in undecided, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was really into math, and so I remember looking into architecture or engineering, but the demands on that for a student athlete were just incredibly high, and so I wasn't sure I was prepared for that. I never counted myself as being all that smart. I just worked really hard on the classroom, and so because of that, I kind of went in undecided. And part of my journey was I had a rough freshman year. On the field, didn't play. Off the field, was kind of seeking out, where's my place? Do I still want to be here? Do I still want to play soccer? There was a lot of big life questions to be answered, and that led into my sophomore year, where I was continuing to ask those big life questions. The opportunity came up to have a survey course, which was a 10-week course, each week spent on a major religion of the world. And so for 1 week, we dove into Judaism, for 1 week into Christianity, for 1 week into Buddhism. And in my head, I was like, this is really a neat thing. So I'm trying to decide what I believe. And I get to take a survey of every religion around the world and figure out what I believe and what I think is right, and maybe this can help me in my life. And it was a really neat step in that way, because the more I heard about other religions and other traditions and faith-based groups, I kept coming back to Christianity to say, okay, I don't believe this other stuff, but no one's shaking the foundations of Christianity. I can look at some other religion and look to the core of it and say, I'm not necessarily buying what they're selling, but I kept coming back to the Bible and saying, well, you can't shake this, you can't disprove it, you can't get rid of it. And so for me, that was a big step intellectually toward Christianity. It didn't shape my heart yet. It didn't convert me per se, but it was a big step in that direction, to kind of be drawn to truth and the core of things, and to be encouraged to dig deeper into every religion and anything you believe, and get to the heart level. And so that was a really big step for me, and that led into the summer where I became a Christian there.
Does your Christian faith help you did it help you with your soccer career, and how?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, for me, I think that was the turning point in my entire career. I was a talented young kid. I had a great youth career and national team and all that stuff, but I came to college, and again, I kind of got smacked in the face. My ego got popped, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I was, as far as life goes and where my heart was at, I was pretty lost. And then the summer after my sophomore year, I became a Christian through a PDL team called the California Seahorses, Southern California Seahorses, and became a Christian throughout that summer. And for me, that was the turning point. God says, if you want your life, you have to lose it. And I think for me, that's kind of what soccer was. To succeed in soccer, I had to give it up and give that, because that was the throne. That was on the throne in my life. That's what I served. That was my God for so long. And so putting God in his rightful place on the throne, it allowed soccer to then come to fruition. And truthfully, I still remember going into that next season saying it was me and another player competing for the spot, and my faith had shaped me. And I remember going into that season saying, I'm not fighting for the starting spot. I want to fight to serve my teammates, to love this guy I'm in competition with. And him and I did not get along. We were not friends. And but I committed to serving him, and loving and serving the team. And the soccer part took care of itself. And I'd never played better. I'd never been fitter and stronger. But all of that was a byproduct of my faith. And so from that point on, any success I have is literally, it's from God, because without him grabbing me and changing my life in college, none of it would have been possible. I truly believe I would have never changed my heart to the point and changed my actions and changed my training and changed my mentality. I don't believe without his power I would have done any of that and come anywhere near what I did in the game.
Okay, so we're gonna go into more coaching questions now. So we know how and why you wanted to become a coach and when you found out you were gonna become a coach. So during your time with the California Victory, you were an assistant goalkeeper coach for the University of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then you also served as a goalkeeper coach for Davidson College.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever aspire to want to become an assistant or a head coach, or did you always want to be a goalkeeper coach because that is your position?
Good question. That's definitely where it started. My passion was for goalkeeping, and I'm a bit crazy, and goalkeepers are crazy, and so I found my niche there. But it's also a specialized skill that helps you break into a coaching staff. Truthfully, I think that was my foot in the door at San Francisco. As one of the women's assistants from UCLA got the head coaching job there for women's soccer the year I went up. Mark Carr, who's now the U23 women's national team coach, is a fantastic guy. So my first official coaching job, I got to learn under him, which was just an incredible experience as well. And so he needed a specific position filled in working with their goalkeepers. So that was my foot in the door at the college level, and it continued to be at Davidson. I think had I just been a normal coach, they probably had better options out there. But me having a specialty in goalkeeping allowed me to get my foot in the door and then learn from these great coaches. Learning from guys like Mark Carr and Eric Visser at San Francisco. Davidson College, learning under Matt Spear, and Tony Falvino was the assistant there, who's also a fantastic coach and head coach now. So having that experience was awesome, but without the goalkeeping part that got me in the door, it would have been a very different path.
So at your time at Bowling Green, you were the goalkeeper and the assistant coach of the men's soccer team. How was your experience at Bowling Green becoming an assistant coach want you to become a head coach eventually?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think in the coaching world, every assistant gets to the point where you love the program. I loved the program at Bowling Green. Eric Nichols there is an absolute stellar coach, top notch, and he did an awesome job of teaching me and mentoring me along the way, and little by little kind of opened up the responsibilities and handed me more, gave me more insight and more kind of backstage pass to see more that he did that I would never have known that it even happened in a college game unless he had opened that door. And so all of that considered, it's kind of became one of those things of the more I found out, the more I loved it. And even the dirty parts of the job, or the parts that aren't fun, or the parts that are a bit ugly and whatever, and it still is just part of a package that I fell in love with. And so it's really part of that. It just drew a picture to me to say, this is really where I feel God calling me, and where a passion is for me. I absolutely love it. And you get to a point where being an assistant is great, and I loved serving that program. But I felt God calling me to say, it's time to make the choices yourself and bring your ideas, and in a little bit learn the hard way. Coach Nichols there was great about hearing me out and hearing my ideas, but at the end of the day, it was his program and he needed to make those calls. And so I felt and he was very encouraging of this as well, but to come to a place like Malone, and if there's a mistake in the coaching, it comes down on me, and I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow from those mistakes. And I think I kind of hit that point where I was I felt ready for that. I felt prepared because of my time at Bowling Green and all my jobs in the past. And So it got me really excited to just and confident to take control of my own program and see what I could do with it. And learn the hard way, for better or worse. You know, when we win games, you learn good lessons. When you lose games, you learn hard lessons. But either way, I was just ready to kind of make those choices, make those calls, and see what I could do.
So was it, as a coach, was it always your intent to be coaching at the university level, or did you want to coach at a professional level or overseas in Europe?
Yeah, you know, part of my career path, at least to this point, has so much to do with where my life went. And because my life was changed in college, that's where I grew in my faith. That's where God really grabbed me, and that's where I felt like my life turned around. I've always felt like He's called me to the college level. You know, I feel weird saying that because every coach should, I feel like you aspire to be like a national team coach or a pro coach, and maybe God will move that in my heart one day. But for me, I think coaching is more than just winning games and winning cups and titles. It's a bigger life picture for me, and I think the university level is such a unique place in that regard. The way we do university here in America, even to have that access to some of the highest level players at their age, versus in other countries where they may be shipped off to go play pro somewhere, and next thing you know, you can't talk to them without an agent, and the connections and relationships become much more convoluted and difficult to navigate. And so I feel like college is such a clear path to say, hey, you can have a very high level player, huge impact on the game, a great talent, and he's going to live in a dorm 100 yards away, and I can text him and bring him into my office and chat and just have a cup of coffee and just kind of do life together and alongside each other. And I think for me, that's where college coaching at the university level is just, it's so special and so unique. And so, like I said, unless God moves my heart a totally different direction, I love the university level, and I'd love to kind of really build something special in that level.
So being a coach, you have to have qualifications, of course. When did you get your first qualification? What is the highest qualification you have?
Good question. I think it depends on how you define qualification. I do look back, and so in the coaching world, you can get badges and licenses. I didn't do that early on. I chose to focus on my playing career. And for me, I think where I draw my line is to say, was I soaking up the value of my time the best I could? And I believe I was. I've worked under some top level coaches. You know, Martin Rennie coached me for 3 years. I soaked up every bit of it, and then he went on to coach it in the MLS. He's still in the USL. He's got a great coaching career. He's coached in Korea. He's coached all over the place. And 3 years with him, in my opinion, was just as valuable as any coaching course I could take. Not to devalue the coaching course, but I had the opportunity to do things that not everyone had. And so even though I wasn't earning badges and licenses, I believe I was really soaking up those opportunities. I also had the chance to serve as a captain on multiple teams, which is a cool backdoor pass to a coach's insight. Charlotte Eagles was great at that. Coach Mark Steffens and Steve Shack there were awesome at bringing the leaders and captains into their conversations. And so you got a lot more background and insight into their thought process that not everyone was privy to. And so with that, and with knowing I was going to be a coach at such an early age, I felt like that's always been part of my path. However, I haven't done it in the form of badges and certifications. And so honestly, I think I have a D license, which is not all that high in the coaching world. But time and money have become kind of a bit of a hurdle in that regard. And so the badges have taken a backseat to what I would maybe deem playing, coaching, and life experiences that I still see a ton of value in.
So at your time being recruited to the U.S. national team, being recruited to UCLA, to California Victory, and everywhere, how would you tell a kid wanting to be recruited, being from a player perspective and a coach perspective, what is the best thing they could do to become recruited by a university or a USL team or even the national team? What did you do differently than everyone else did?
I love that, and it's going to be a vague answer, which probably won't help a lot of people, but I think the best way I could describe it would be get every ounce out of yourself that you can. And what I mean by that is you push yourself every day. I've recruited players because of training sessions I saw them in. I've recruited players because of titles that they won and seeing them perform big in championship games, and everywhere in between. And so the path for everyone to be seen is different. There's not one path to being recruited. But what I can say is being the best you in every moment, so that you're never having to put on a fake face, is what I would encourage players to do. And that's where, again, I recruited a player, 2 players in fact. I still remember back in the Dayton area a few years back where their coach told me how great they were, and I wanted to see for myself. And so I snuck up on a training session unannounced, sat on a hill. They had no idea I was there. And at the end of the training session, I decided I want those 2 guys. They were the top performers in training, worked the hardest. They didn't let their standard drop. And so you never know who's watching or when they're watching. And so that's always really important to me. And again, part of that tagged with, don't be a great performer in a game, but then cruise through a training session like it's no big deal. Because maybe a coach comes to see you in that moment and realizes that you're a different person in training than you are in a game. And I think every coach wants somebody who's very consistent and consistently themselves, and that's where for me it's important. It's also in the way you act. If maybe I see you on a training field or in a coaching session or a camp, and you're very well behaved and your language is great and you're encouraging and positive, and then I see you with your headphones on in the parking lot cursing at your mom, it shows me that you're a different person in different scenarios, and it shows me a fake side of yourself. And so for me, that's where I say is be yourself and get the most out of yourself. And if you're doing that, I honestly believe that the path will be created for you. By being yourself and pushing yourself to reach the highest levels that you can to get the most out of yourself every day in training, that will be rewarded. Whether it's with cup titles and those chances or a national team, it's those opportunities arise because of the work you've put in. And so that's where I think my biggest advice would be to that, is to be yourself and get every ounce out of yourself that you can, and God will make a way for you to find the right program. It doesn't mean that everyone ends up at the national champion D1 program. That's not everyone's path. But to find the right path for each individual where they can grow and flourish their most, that's where the special magic kind of happens for me.
And for players that want to aspire to become a coach, do you have any tips or advice for those who want to coach at a university or a national level?
Yeah, I would say if you know that ahead of time, don't delay the process. Begin thinking like a coach as soon as you make that choice. And that doesn't mean stop thinking like a player when you're a player, but create practices and challenge your own thinking in that way. And so if you want to be a coach, you should be looking at game film of yourself, of other teams, things like that. Pick your coach's brain. If somebody wants to be a coach, they should be in their coach's office and say, hey, you gave us this scouting report. What did you see? How did you get that information? Where can I get that information? One unique thing I personally did that I would recommend, as soon as I knew I wanted to be a high-level coach, I wrote myself emails, and I've kept them. I have emails going back all the way to about 2002, I think, of notes for myself, like from myself to myself, about things I liked and things I didn't that coaching staffs have done over the years. I have notes of something maybe that a coach did that I was like, hey, this made us feel really good. This helped us in preparation for this kind of a game. Remember this and do this again later for your teams. I also have things that, hey, my coach said this today. This really didn't make any of us feel better. It didn't make our team better. Don't do that to your team. Doesn't mean that you're perfect, but I've got 16 years of notes from a player's perspective on what a coaching staff gives them, makes them feel, and that stuff has become very valuable. And again, that was because when I was 18, I decided I want to be a coach, and I've written myself notes ever since. And so I felt like that's really special. Once a year before the season, actually, usually in the summertime, I'll go back and I'll read my notes. Because you're not talking about thousands of emails, but there's probably 20 or 30 over the years that I've written myself, and with various notes. And it's important to remember that, especially me, as I'm only getting older every year. But freshmen in college come in the same age every year, and so I'm one more year removed from them every new season. But if I can go back and read my notes of what I felt like as an 18-year-old, what the recruiting process was like, and what I felt like when my coach spoke to me in a certain way or didn't, when I played and when I didn't, and where my mentality was, and kind of remind myself and put myself in their shoes. It helps me to be more maybe empathetic to players and remember what it's like being in each person's specific position. And so, like I said, I think for that's one thing I would recommend is if you want to be a coach, don't wait to one day begin thinking like a coach. Think about it now and start it, because it'll only help you be a better player in the end.
So you've played with and being coached by and coached with a lot of memorable people. This may be a tough question, but who is the most memorable player you've ever played with, and who is the most memorable coach that has ever coached you?
Oof, those are tough questions. Most memorable coach I would say is Tom Fitzgerald. I've been blessed with some great coaches, but he was the coach of UCLA in 2002, 2003, and the confidence and the way he went about his business, I just felt like was fantastic. He had such a great balance of himself in making every player feel valued and cared for, and being encouraging and positive. But when he needed to have some nails and dig into you, nobody questioned his authority. He was an awesome manager, more than a coach even, in managing his players, managing his team, and I would even say, looking back, managing his staff. He was the head coach, but he didn't run every facet of training. Other guys took control, and he empowered his coaching staff so that they were a united front in bringing the group together. And he just did that in a spectacular way. So as a coach, he really had one of those effects where I felt like he may be one of, if not the best coaches I've ever played for. But at the same token, I think Martin Rennie and Mark Steffens also have to get shout-outs, because they were just they're top-class coaches, bottom line. And so I've been incredibly blessed with great leadership and great insight from those guys over the years. As far as players go, man, you're right. I played with some absolute spectacular players, way above my pay grade. There were players I think that on the field made big impacts. There's I don't even know where to start the list. Truthfully, you've done the research. You can go back on some of that, but I think for me, when I look back, I think of the value that guys gave that were intangible. Things that guys did that didn't make the headlines. A couple of the guys that always stand out to me, there was a player named Dan Young. Didn't turn pro, but he was on my PDL team back when I became a Christian, and had just such an impact on me. He was that guy that I think day one I mentioned an issue I was having, and he didn't even know my name yet, and he was offering to help. What can I do? How can I be there? Absolute servant leader. And so he's just to this day had an impact on me in that way. It was always those kind of guys that I think served me best. In college, there was a player named Phil Haar. Also didn't turn pro. In fact, if I remember right, he got cut from the team his senior year. Controversial cut in my opinion, but Phil was a guy who, not the best player on UCLA's roster, got very limited minutes. But him and I shared in that pain of not always being on the field, and some of his insights to me have been phenomenal, and things that I still remember to this day. So, as far as impactful players, there's amazing players, soccer players I've played with, but the ones that have had the biggest impact on me were the guys that really took it to a heart level, and made a life impact on me, not just soccer.
So you talked about your most memorable coach, Fitzgerald. Did you take any traits or personality stuff from him to shape who the coach you are today?
Oh, tons. Yeah, he was one of those early on that I knew I wanted to be a coach, and I was soaking up everything that I could from him. And that's where I think one of the big impacts on me that he had on me was his balance of encouragement and positivity, but mixed with accountability and a little bit of a hard side. To hold players to the highest standard. I remember one day in practice, he stopped, he yelled at us, and demanded that basically we do a thing that none of us thought we could do. It was essentially a very difficult pass to execute, and we didn't want to try it because we thought it was risky. He challenged us to say, yes, it's risky, but who cares? Do it, and do it right. And he was a little harsher than that, but little things like that for us as players it was so empowering, because we kind of had the glass ceiling broke in a little bit in that moment, because it was to say there are no limits. If we want to be great and we want to be the best, then why are we going to limit ourselves and say that there's anything we can't do on the field? There's not a pass that we can't complete. There's not a combination we can't execute. And so little things like that I would soak up from him. And like I said, his demeanor and balance in his personality was spectacular in that way, and empowering as a player. I think one thing that I need to move toward in my coaching that came from his experience, because he was a bit older, probably in his 50s or 60s by the time he got to UCLA, was also his balance with physical distance to the team. Some days he would be right there on the side of a drill. Other times he would be 20 yards removed. And he just had a great sense of when we needed him there and when he needed to withdraw and let us do our thing. And as a coach, that's hard. You want to play a part and have a hand in every moment of training and every moment of the game. It's a difficult mentality to be able to sit back and really trust your team to handle business and handle that moment. And so he was excellent at that, and that was another one of those things that I think I strive for. As a new coach, it's so hard. You want to take grasp of every moment, but to work toward that, I think, is definitely a goal of mine, to slowly withdraw and hand more and more power to the team to execute and handle business.
So this may be a tough question to answer, but how would you describe yourself as a coach to a parent, a player, a recruit, or just anyone that's wondering like who you are as a coach?
Oh man, that's a really hard one. It's hard to say how I would describe myself. I'll say how I want to be maybe perceived as a bigger picture coach. I've told our team this, and we can win every game all season, and that's great. Obviously, a coach wants to win, but if we do it in the wrong ways, if we do it with the wrong motivation, the wrong heart, and representing ourselves in less than what we can, then it means nothing to me. And so I would say that as a coach, I'm a big picture coach, and I believe that if you shoot for a higher goal, if you shoot to serve God and be your absolute best and soak up every ounce of yourself you can and the team, then we're going to be just fine. The victories will happen, the goals will come, and it'll come in a much more fruitful way in life than just winning some games. And so if I chose what I would like to be, it would be that, a big picture kind of a coach, and to see more value in a moment than just that moment, to see more value in a drill than just working on your first touch, but instead to realize this might be a simple drill, but it's going to show me someone's mentality and their approach and their humility and their drive to execute in simple details and things like that. And so for me, I think that's what I would strive to do, is to connect bigger things. That's one of the magical things in soccer for me too, is why sports ministry can be so powerful, is because there's moments that apply in sports that don't apply anywhere else in life. And in those moments, if you can find bigger life lessons and faith lessons in those times, I think there's so much value in that time and so much to grasp onto and grow from. And so for me, again, as a coach, I'd like to think I would like to believe that I can achieve a point where I can identify those moments and encourage players in that time to be their best in that moment, to learn in those times and to grow in those times. It doesn't mean always succeeding in that moment, but it does mean growing in that moment. And when you grasp onto that kind of a success, I think is huge. And I'd like to see that for my players, and I'd like to see that for myself. And so hopefully that's at least the path I'm on.
So our last question relates to Malone. So knowing that your wife was an alum to Malone and lived in the area and that it's a Christian school, how was your journey from U.S. national team to UCLA to USL to Division I schools, coming here to Malone? How was your journey shaped to where you are now?
Awesome question, man. I think for me, it's all about what God calls you to. And one of the funny things in coaching that I've really decided in my life is that there's always some ladder or path that everyone thinks you should be on. But that's not what God describes, and that's not what I've defined in my own life. And so for me, success and my goals come from what I envision and what I want to make happen, and what God calls me to in that way. And so for me, that's where Malone takes a special place in my heart. Through my wife, I have a connection here, and through my own career, I've seen the power that a faith a faith-based athlete can bring to the field. And so for me, I look at Malone and I feel like it's absolutely primed and ready for a spiritual revival that ends up showing results on the field. And why this place is so special to me, and to come into a program that was 1-15 last year, is because we're starting at the foundational level to build towards something that I think could be really, really special. Malone, to me, God put an absolute spotlight on this university to say that he wanted me here. And I honestly believe that if we can formulate the kind of program that serves God and serves a higher purpose, and does that long term, does that in a lifestyle, does that at a heart level, that the victories will come and we can make a big splash and a big impact at the Division II level at a small Christian school in Canton, but with the bedrock of faith being our foundation. Man, I just think the sky's the limit. And so I felt like the minute this popped up on a job board, I actually apologized to Charlie Grimes, the AD here, because I told him there's probably a bunch of typos in my resume and cover letter, because the minute it popped up, I pulled my laptop out and I got to town and I applied on the spot. I wasn't going to wait another second. God made it very clear that this was a really special place, and that he could do his work, at least in part through me, by being here. And so this job opened up, and it just was crystal clear that would be a really great place to be. And I've been blessed ever since that God made a way for me to be